Hey everybody, welcome to Mastering Avantra. My name is Brenton O'Callaghan, and this is the first of a two-part series called I've installed Avantra, now what? We're going to take you through some of the fundamental items you would want to start doing the minute you've installed an Avantra system. So today, we're going to be covering the configuration of an agent on an SAP system, so configure it on the host, and then also configuring that SAP system within your Avantra master server. Then to finish this session, we're going to install the mobile app on one of our mobile devices, and we're going to configure it to talk to the same Avantra master server so we can see all of the checks and all of the servers that we've configured. In part 2, we'll show you how to connect your cloud, so connect to either your AWS, GCP, or Azure instance, as well as a number of other items that you'll find useful, including mass upload of your landscape to your Avantra master server. So why don't we go ahead and get started for part 1. And to start off, we're going to have a quick look around the system we're playing with, and then we're going to configure an SAP system's host with an agent, and then add the SAP system itself. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to switch over to my screen over here. And you can see I'm looking at an Avantra system. Now, let me just quickly show you where we are. So if I go to About, you'll see I'm running Avantra 20.11.0. As of today, by the way, 20.11.1 is out. I just haven't installed it in this system. Let's not tempt fate with on recording days. So 20.11.0 is ready for use. And if I hit check for update, we will of course get a nice little indicator that 20.11.1 is available if I want to upgrade to it. I can do that another time. It's a really easy update. Takes 2 or 3 minutes. But for now, let's have a look around the rest of the system. So if I go into servers, I can see I have one server configured at the moment, and that's actually the server that this machine is running on. So gdev cd ma avasrv. So you can see here I'm running on an Ubuntu 20.04 box with 3 gigs or just under 4 gigs of memory, using Agent 20.11, and it's using the OS level Java version, which is why it hasn't picked that up. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add an SAP system that I have set up in the past. This SAP system is running a basic NetWeaver installation. It doesn't have the agent installed. So the first thing we're going to do is install the agent and configure it here as a server. Then once we've that done, then we'll configure the SAP system on that box to appear, including the setting up of the users within SAP for the agent to actually be able to log in. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to switch over here to my terminal window, and I'm going to make the text a little bit bigger so that you can see. And I'm going to log into the machine that we're working on. So if I do this, there we go. So I've logged in. So I'm actually using an Ubuntu 20.04.1 LTS installation. And you can see here I'm logged into this host name here, gdev cd nwde2. Very memorable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a user that has been set up for me to run this agent. In this case, it's using one of our old names, Xandria. Those of you who've been using Avantra for a while will know that that was one of the previous names by which the product was called. So I'm going to su to that user, and I'm going to switch into a directory I've already prepared where we're going to install our agent. So if I do an ls, you'll see I've already dropped the agent installer for version 20.11 onto the machine, ready to go. What you'll also notice if I come up a directory, I also have a Java JRE installed specifically for this agent. Because this is running an SAP system, I didn't want to confuse the Java version that's being used by the SAP system with the one that's running for my agent. This is quite a common setup. So a lot of people opt to have these separate. It's nice, of course, when they're all in sync. You only have to ever do one update, but that can cause a bit of a headache if you're talking about keeping patch levels in sync for different versions. So I have Java ready to go. So why don't we go ahead and install our agent. So let me clear my window here. So just a reminder, I have the agent installer here, which I can execute just like this. Now, because I'm not using the host Java installation and I want to use a specific one, I want to tell the installer to use that specific Java version. So the first thing I do is I do 2 dashes like this, which says I'm going to provide some input to this agent installer. And the input I'm going to provide is JVM equals, so Java Virtual Machine equals, and it's going to be at syslink java bin, I believe, just like that. Okay, so I'm running the agent installer, I'm providing some parameters, and the parameter JVM is equal to /syslink/java/bin, which is the location of the runtime environment of Java I want to use. So I hit enter, and it's doing all of its uncompressing and verifications. So the first thing it says is it found a compatible Java in syslink java bin. This is the most common place that your agent installation would fail. If you had an incompatible Java version or it couldn't find the Java version, you'll probably see an error there and you'd have to start again. But in this case, it's quite happy. It's found our Java installation. It's asked me what port I want the agent to listen on. By default, we listen on 9051. And don't forget, the Avantra master server listens on 9050. So the agent communicates with the master over 9050. The master communicates with the agent over 9051. So we hit OK. I'm happy with that. So found compatible Java again, save the agent configuration, and the port is equal to 9051. Do I want to start the Avantra agent? I'm going to say yes, I do. And that's it. Okay, great. So that's the agent completely installed on this box. You can see it only takes a couple of seconds, especially if you're not explaining it like I am. You'd have this done in no time. So let's switch back to our Avantra server and let's add the server to this installation. So we're going to add a new physical server, and let's go back and just copy the host name here for the sake of being lazy. So we're going to put that in here. I'm going to put it under the customer mastering Avantra. I'm going to make it a test system. And I know, and I wrote it down here, the IP address is this, 83.104. Now, I'm sure I can use the internal, there's an internal IP address for this as well, but this one will work just as well for the cases of this demo. Normally, you'd use an internal IP address, a 10 dot or a 192 dot or a 172 dot subnet. So let's hit OK, and that's it. Right. So now we've added this server. We can add some stuff like time zones, DNS domains, DNS host aliases. In this case, we don't need any of that information. So I'm just going to send to agent and initialize the agent just to kind of force. Okay, so successfully initialized gdev cd nwde2. You'll have seen a red error pop up there temporarily, which was just while it was figuring out whether it could actually communicate with the server or not. So hopefully now in a few minutes, we should start to see some more information come up about this server. And the way you know this is already starting to work while you're waiting for information to come back is you'll start to see information pop up here when you do a refresh. So you can see here, it's already detected that the agent it's communicating with on the remote server is version 20.11.0. So at this point, you can kind of be pretty sure that you're going to get a successful information. So at this point, if I went into the checks, which are the out-of-the-box checks that Avantra provides for an agent, the first one you'll see is Agent Connect. If that's green, it means, hey, the Avantra master server is able to hit the agent on the remote box. An agent alive is exactly what it sounds like. It's the agent is alive, so that's green. And what it has now done is it's instructed the agent to perform some self-tests, which will allow these to be populated around CPU load, file systems, memory, paging size, etc., etc. So we can refresh this, and after a couple of minutes, we'll start to see more of this go green as we go through. So let's just recap what we've done there. So we logged on to an operating system where we have an SAP system running. We installed an Avantra agent by telling it to use a Java runtime that we'd installed specifically locally. Once we'd installed that, it asked us what port that we wanted it to run on, and we selected the default port of 9051. My apologies. And then it is now doing its first communications from the Avantra system to that agent to get all this information. And you can see here, we actually have all green bar 1. Let's go and have a look at the self-check. Okay. Aha. So what's happened here is we've got an Amber Alert on this server telling us there's SAP systems on this server which are not configured for monitoring. So this is really useful because now we can see, oh, do you know what? Actually, we forgot to configure the SAP system. Let's go ahead and do that. So there we go. So step 1 was to configure the agent on the machine. That's all done and it's ready to go. Next, we want to add our we want to add our SAP system to our Avantra master server. Now you can see I have no SAP systems configured here. So before I do that, I'm going to need some credentials. So why don't we go ahead and log into the system we're looking at. So I have it configured here, NWDE2. I'm going to hit connect. And just like that, I'm up. So I'm going to log in using a user I had pre-configured. Okay. So I'm into a standard SAP NetWeaver system. If I go and I have a look at the status of the system, you'll see exactly what we're talking about here. Because this is only a demo, this system tends to compile everything as I'm going through it, so apologies if it's a little bit slow. But we're talking about a standard demo system, Unicode on Sybase version 16, a database called NPL on the current host. And if we want to see more information about what we have installed, we're using a kernel 753, etc., etc., etc. So that's pretty much all the information about this system. SAP basis 752 SP04, in case anybody's interested. So now that we have this system installed, one of the things I asked Pierre, our head of, who provided me this system, our head of SAP engineering, he actually has already installed the 2 Avantra transport requests that are required for Evantra to successfully monitor and in-depth monitor your SAP system. So for every SAP system, there's 2 transports involved. There's the code, which is installed in this case using transport 9070, and then there's the role. So this is what provides the authorization, so that's on 79. So you can see these here. There's lots of documentation on docs.avantra.com about exactly what's in these. If you're very interested, you can go in and actually have a look at the code because, hey, it's ABAP and it's completely readable. So if you go into SE80 into the developer workbench, you can see if you look at /syslink/Andrea, you'll find all of our classes and programs that come as part of the transport. But in this case, we know that the code is in there, so the classes and the programs, and we know the role is in there. Now we need to create a user that Avantra will use to log into your SAP system to get all the statistics and information. So I'm going to go over to the user management, and I'm going to create a user called Avantra. So this has not been done yet, so it says no results found. So I'm going to simply create user, like this. I was testing this earlier, so it's asking, do I want to add data from an old version of this user to this one? I don't. So service user, Avantra service user is the name of this user. Log on data, I'm going to set a password. Just like that. And then I'm going to add the role that we spoke about. So Z Avantra. So there you go. So this is the default role that we provide with our transports. One thing to be aware of is you may need to go in and regenerate this role once you've imported into the system. So if you double click into it, there we go, you'll see all this information in here. And if you go into authorizations, there are times you need to actually go in to display the authorization data and regenerate it. In this case, I don't need to, I've already used it. You also may need to sync the user master record. These are completely normal things. Anybody who's setting up this user for you, your DBA, your SAP admin or whatever the case may be, they'll know what to do here. This is completely common. But what I've done here is I'm creating a user called Avantra. I'm assigning the role Z Avantra, and that's pretty much it. So if I come out, I'll log off. Let's just make sure that I configured that correctly. So Avantra. Okay, and it says change the password. Oops. Just like that. Okay, so it works. But the nice thing about this user is if I even try to go to SU01, I'm not going to be able to. So one of the things our role provides is very, very granular and locked down permissions. And it's one of the reasons we provide our own role rather than asking you to provide a standard SAP role. We only want our user and you only want our user to have the minimum required permissions to be able to execute what we need to execute to monitor your system. We don't need to be doing anything else, which is why we provide the role, which is why, as you can see here, I have no authorizations as this user to do anything else within the system. Okay, so we've logged onto the SAP system. We have configured a user using the standard role that's provided. We know that the Avantra transport code is already in there. So now why don't we go ahead and add the SAP system to Avantra? So I'm going to say new SAP system. And I know this system is called NPL. I mean, you can call it what you like. Everybody has their own naming conventions. It's a test system and it's an ABAP system. So I hit next, and my RFC user is going to be the user I just created. Like this. The client is 001, and the ABAP database schema user, I know in this case, which because I had to look at it earlier, I'm just going to use the SAP SA. You can use whatever user you want to use or that has the required permissions. And I'll provide the password like this, and I hit OK. So now I've provided information about NPL as the system. I provided the RFC user for connecting on client 001 and its password. I provided the database schema user. I do need to provide the database host as well, which I know in this case is the same as the server we had over here. So for the sake of ease, I'm going to copy this one into the database host. The database port is the standard database port for a Sybase, so 4901. Database name is the name of my SID. And I'm going to set the monitoring server for this database, because remember, you can have remote monitoring databases as well as this server, and hit apply. Okay, so SAP system NPL was successfully saved. So what I can do now is I can send to agent. So I'm using the send to agent button here, which is just a kind of a kick of what would happen anyway, which forces the Avantra master server to send to our gdev cd nwde2 server the fact that we have some new and updated configuration. Hey, we expect you to find a SAP SID called NPL. Can you go and set it up? And of course, using the session keys that are set up between the master and the Avantra agent, it transfers the credentials as well, and stores those credentials in memory in an encrypted form for the agent to be able to access your SAP system. So now the waiting starts. I mean, it's gone amber already. So what will happen now is it will go through and start to detect. So it's already detected that there's the dialog instance and the ABAP central instance set up on the system, and it'll go through and it'll start to figure out, is there a system on this machine? Is it configured and ready to go? What else? What is the state of this system? What's the state of the database on this system? And it'll start to report all that information back here. So this takes a few minutes, especially for the first run, while it figures out where everything is, or it comes across any errors if we've misconfigured any of this. Hopefully we haven't. Okay, so it's already picked up on the fact that it has found the instance on there, so 0100, and now it's starting to test the RFC connect, the work processes there, the message server. It'll go through each one of those and test them, and then report back to the Evantra server over the next few minutes. So let's recap on everything we've done so far. So we first of all logged into our server here, gdev cd nwde2. And as you can see in just a few commands here, we managed to install the agent, providing a specific Java runtime environment that I'd put on the machine already. We configured it to listen on port 9051. We started the agent. Then we went to our Avantra server and we configured this server as a new server here within Avantra. If I do a refresh here, you'll see it's actually populated all the rest of the information. So it's Ubuntu 20.04, what OS version. So I'm running this on GCP, as you can see. And it's got some more information then about physical memory, the OS, and all that kind of fun stuff. Then what we did was we logged into the SAP system itself and we created a service user for Avantra to be able to log on to monitor them, to monitor the SAP instance. We already had imported the transport requests. Remember, there are two. There's one delivering the code that is executed by Avantra to monitor your system, and there's one that delivers a role that is applied to the service user to provide the correct and very granular authorizations we require to be able to monitor your system in depth. Once we had that user available, we went in and configured the SAP system NPL. And here we provided that RFC user that we created with the password and the client we wanted to log on to. We provided the ABAP database schema user and its password. We provided the host name of the database, because frequently these things are split out, the port to which to connect to it, and the database name itself, and then the server we wanted to use to monitor the database. Once we did that, we then sent all this configuration out to the agent, and now it's running all of its checks on the machine itself to see, okay, what kind of SAP system is this? And it's now logging into the various components of the system, doing its first set of checks, and it'll start to report back over the next kind of 5 or so minutes. So while we're waiting for this to fully configure, why don't we go ahead and have a bit of fun with the next set here. So I'm just going to set up here from my iPhone so that I can show you how to configure the Avantra mobile app to connect to this Avantra instance. Okay, great. So I just had to update some of my phone settings here to get it to actually display on screen. So why don't we transition over to that now? So on the left, you can still see, on my left anyway, you can still see my Avantra system, and we'll keep an eye on this. And on the right, you should be able to see my mobile phone over here. So I'm going to launch the Evantra app. Now, this app is available from the Google Play Store, and it's available from the iOS App Store as well. So you should be able to access this today. Once you launch it for the first time, you get this very basic screen saying, hey, time to add your Avantra server to get started to monitor your SAP landscape. So let's go ahead and do this. So we hit the plus button. For the sake of this one, I'm just going to call this server AM, stands for Avantra Master. And I'm going to type in that it's at am.bocdn. Oops. Gotta love autocorrect. cdn.com. Now, don't forget as well, if your Avantra Master, and mine is operating on a non-standard port, so I'm operating on port 8443, remember that you can do this in the mobile app as well by doing colon and then the port number 8443. So I'll do AM here again. My username is, yep, I wrote this down earlier. So mobile _ user. Obviously, this would just be your standard username in any normal setting, but in this case, I set up a dedicated user just because you're going to be able to see me typing. Although, interestingly, it hides the keyboard and you can't see that. That's quite cool. So I'm now going to type the password. Like this. And I'm going to say, yes, I want this to be my default server every time I open the app. So then I hit go, and boom. Just like that, it has taken the settings I've given it and it's gone, right, okay. This is the server. I've managed to log on, and it does this over port 8443. And it's managed to actually log in. And we can see here, if we go into critical and warning, it's showing that we have some warnings on our server NPL. So let's do a refresh here and have a look and see what it's complaining about. Okay, so it's still doing its initial configuration. Let's dive in and see if it's got a specific error that we can start to diagnose. Check status not found for NPL, no active central instance. So it's still figuring out whether there's a central instance. So it's just taking its time, and I'm sure this will update itself over the next few minutes, or hopefully. If not, we'll dive in and we'll see what the story is. And if I go back here on the mobile app, you can see if I go into, for example, show me all systems with monitoring on, I can see I've got my mastering Avantra server, the master server we're looking at. I can go in and see the checks for this server. I can go in and see the history of the checks. One of the really nice things as well is if I want to go in and see all the critical checks, so system alive here, okay. So for example, here now it's complaining, something's wrong with system alive for the system NPL. I can confirm this check here. Now, this is really cool functionality that's been built into Avantra from the start. If you've a multi-locational team, and let's face it, did I just make up that phrase? Anyway, if you have a team that's distributed across the world, you might not always have them sitting side by side or even talking to each other. So it's nice to be able to confirm and say, you know what, confirmed by BOC, the check system alive. So what I'm doing here is I'm acknowledging that I know there's an issue and I'm working on it. So I hit confirm, and it's actually then but a big check mark saying Brenton's working on this. And this tells anybody else that looks at the system, hey, Brenton's working on this, don't worry. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have seen that actually my screen refreshed while I was doing that. And what's happened here is the agent has successfully connected to the SAP system. And what's really cool here is it has applied all of these checks that you see here in this list out of the box by default. So it's detected that it's a NetWeaver ABAP system, and it's gone, okay, I'm going to monitor ICM stat, I'm going to monitor job stat, QRFC, TMS import statistics, update queue, update stat. All of this stuff is provided out of the box by default based on what is detected within the system. So you got your real-time monitoring checks. And by the way, there's the one I acknowledged here a few minutes ago via the mobile app. And if I double click in, we'll see that it's been acknowledged here. So confirmed by box, I meant to put BRO, the check system alive. So you can see immediately that you've got this collaborative setup here within the system. And I've also got my daily checks which will be applied over the next few minutes. Again, all out of the box. Keep refreshing, stuff will keep updating. It's also complaining to me here that I've not provided an SAP control user. Again, you can go in and start to do that stuff down here. In the properties, you can say SAP control user is this. You can also provide, and I like pointing this out, and I'm not going to go through this now, we'll do this in a separate session. You can provide an operating system user for starting and stopping the database. Now, one of the key pieces of functionality we introduced with it in 2020, early on in version 20.2, if memory serves, we introduced the concept of full stack start stop. So this is where, with these buttons up here, or via an automated maintenance window, or via basically anything, you can trigger an automation that starts and stops, your SAP system from, if you're running in the cloud, from the OS level right the way up through the database, through the application level, whatever the case may be. We do this full stack start stop. So if I did stop here, okay, it's complaining here I've not provided the SAP control user, so that's a very fair error. But if I wanted to, I could stop just the application layer, or the application layer and the database, or the application layer, the database, and the OS. So you get a huge amount of control from an automated fashion of your SAP systems if you start to configure these extra pieces of information. And I could have a predefined OS user just for this system, or a predefined one which I've stored centrally, or I can define an ad hoc one just for this system as well. So lots of stuff you can do here once you get your SAP system up and running. But let's do a refresh of our list of systems. And you'll see here that MPL is ready to go. Now it's red because we have our system alive problem. So what's complete? DB connect not found for system MPL. I believe this will go green shortly. So I'm not so worried about that. In fact, we'll just tell it to go away and execute it again. And I'm sure that'll go green in the next few minutes. So there we go. We have configured our agent on an operating system, which is running an SAP system. We've gone into the SAP system and set up a service user for Avantra to connect with. And then we have gone and configured the SAP system within Evantra and seen that Avantra has automatically said, okay, this is an ABAP system. Here are the checks I'm going to apply out of the box. Here's the current status of those checks. We acknowledged a check that is currently red. And yeah, now it's gone away to do even more checking. And the next step on this one would be to maybe add some custom checks, which is where you can develop your own checks from scratch and add them to this list. But that's a topic for another day, another video. I hope this has been a really useful part one of I've installed Avantra, what do I do next? As I mentioned in part two, we're hoping to cover how to connect your cloud, how to connect maybe a database, and also one of the big ones I want to cover, which is very, very often used, is, okay, how do I get my landscape of 50 systems up here? Do I have to configure them all manually, or can I do it as a mass upload? The good news is you can do it as a mass upload, and I'm going to take you through how to do that in the next version of this video. So for now, thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy playing with Avantra.